Hi, this is Guy Wallace. I started in learning and development way back in 1979, and I semi-retired in 2023. But my current mission as a semi-retired L&D professional is to help enterprise learning and development organizations become more performance-based. Welcome to my podcast. Welcome to my podcast, Donald. It's great to see you, and for my audience, this is Donald Clark Plan B, because there are numerous Donald Clarks out there in the world for us to be informed and entertained by. But Donald, welcome. You're my very first guest on this podcast, and so could you please introduce yourself for our audience members who might not know you, and can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about before you dive in deep?
Okay, well, it's an honor to be the first guy. That's great. Thank you very much for that. So, as you can already hear from my accent, I'm Donald. I'm from Scotland originally, although I live in England, in Brighton, as far away from Scotland as you can get in the UK. I've lived here for a long, long time. Hasn't changed my accent. But really, I've spent the last 40 years in learning technologies, really, in the learning world. Although my deeper interest is in learning theory and so on, but technology happens to be the angle I've made a living in. And more recently, since 2014, really, although I had gone way back to my time when I was a student, I went to an American college and picked up a little bit of AI stuff there at Dartmouth, where the first modern conference on AI was held, and they had a little shrine and room to that there, actually, and some stuff in the 90s and expert systems. Since 2014, I've really focused 100% on AI, written several books on this subject, given talks all over the world, but more importantly, I'm a practitioner like you guys. I like doing stuff. Like, it's one thing to talk, but you got to walk the walk as well. So I've spent the last 10 years really delivering a lot of AI in learning projects across Europe, really, mostly mainland Europe, not the UK, curiously. But so that's my shtick these days. But I have a particular interest in performance support, and I know we have a relationship going way back, and I've done a few podcasts in the past, because I, like you, have well, I think the AI thing, interestingly, is like this huge rocket booster on the back of performance support, and I've always believed that, and so it sort of confirmed the view I've always had, that the whole delivering courses, like drowning people, a tsunami of courses, was always a flaky attitude towards learning, because that's not how people learn, by and large. Sometimes interesting, useful, but let's widen the tool set out. Suddenly, this thing lands on our lap, AI. And all of us who have been reading this stuff since the 90s, and in your case, much earlier, trying to get the ball rolling. Suddenly, the ball is rolling, and that's what's so great about this podcast. Sorry, that was a long intro there, but
No, well, thank you about that. So I'm really excited about this, because I think back to my very first day out of college in my job, and I was given 3 things to read, and one of them was a newsletter from Praxis, which was the consulting firm of Tom Gilbert and Gary Rumler, and that was focused on guidance, the short way home. This was from 1970, but in 1979, when I read it, it was already known as job aids, and then 10 years later, electronic performance support systems, and by numerous other names since then. But the people that I learned from in my professional organization really were focused on job aids and performance support, in place of learning, in place of trying to force people to memorize, impossibly memorize, all the content. It was just much easier to give them that kind of guidance. So I know you've been focused on this, and you've been writing a lot about this online. So let's just dive in and tell us, what's the status of AI and how is it impacting performance support?
Yes, well, I think there are several strands to this that come together in a rope, as it were. One is when AI, so we're 2 and a bit years into this generative AI thing, although I was using it long, long before that. I think what's interesting is just empirically, the ground base here. What are these hundreds of millions of people in the fastest adopted technology in the history of our species? What are they doing with this thing? Whoa, it can be answered in 2 words: performance support, really. Almost everybody who uses AI, doesn't matter whether you're using Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, one of the many tools in the market, are using it for performance support. And by that, I mean the very simple definition of performance support as, oh God, I'm doing something, I need some help, I'm stuck. Oh yeah, I'll get the answer here, or I'll get some help here. It's a simple human reaction, and that's how we work. That's why most learning in the workplace, especially, is learning by doing. We didn't go on a course in PowerPoint. We started using PowerPoint. And this is not to belittle the idea that some formal learning is necessary. But as you rightly said in your introduction, it was interesting. I mean, your history goes way further back to Rumler and others that I was unaware of. But there's also another big resurgence that we both remember. And you mentioned Gloria Gary's electronic performance support systems. Of course, Marsink, Watkins, and people like Jay Cross who were going on about informal learning. There was a whole lot of theory there in the 90s that was really super interesting, which has come to pass. And they were saying, listen, look empirically at how people learn. Yeah, they learn by doing things. They learn by coming across a problem and overcoming it, finding the right tools. And rather than L&D supporting that, we've supported the let's slab out course after course after course, often on subjects that are quite remote from performance, in fact. And therefore, I think AI is sweeping through the industry like a breath of fresh air, going back to how people actually learn, giving them agency. The interesting angle here is it gives them agency, not only agency, a really easy to use interface, which is critical here. You just type something in, gives you an answer. You just upload an Excel file, it'll do some data analysis for you. And now, 2 days ago, we had Gemini releasing video. You can upload a video. Imagine that in actual skills-based stuff, where it can actually give you a critique of your performance and maybe compare how you performed in this time compared to last time. So I think there's this massive fan of opportunity opening up on performance support, some of which I've been involved in. A second strand in the thing, which we may want to discuss in more detail, is the way people are using this. So it's very difficult culturally to get AI into organizations because they're institutions, whether they're educational institutions like schools or community colleges or universities, or they're workplaces, whether it's in the public or private sector organizations. And they've decided to hold out, drop the drawbridge. But so people are actually, this stuff is so useful, just people are just using it anyway. And I call that AI on the sly. And there's report after report after report. The empirical evidence in these surveys show that people are just getting on and using this stuff, even though their boss, their institution's telling them they can't. And it was just like Wikipedia. I remember when, colleges tried to ban Wikipedia and YouTube. Of all the things to do, the greatest knowledge base our species have ever produced, and educationalists wanted to ban it. I think we're in a similar situation with AI in many ways, a lot of sort of faux moralizing to protect themselves from it, but it's happening anyway. So I think it's all good, which is why I've decided to focus wholly and utterly on those two letters, Guy, because I think the benefits will turn out to be phenomenal.
Oh, I agree. I think it's very exciting. The one thing that's really changed since I first got into the business is the use of digital tools and technologies such as the internet and search, and now AI. And it can help us, develop our products. It can help us administrate them, and can help us deploy them. So I hope that you get into what you mentioned here, because I saw you writing about this on LinkedIn just a couple days ago about the video and AI now being able to critique somebody's work. And so I hope that you get into that, because I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. I didn't go deep and follow up on that, but so tell us more.
Okay, well, just before we do that, I think just to dwell a little bit on that notion, to bridge into that in a sense, I think there's an interesting thing happening in L&D generally, which I'd like to sort of lay out here. And I described L&D as a bit like a wagon without a horse. We've been loading the wagon up with courses and courses, and it's got such a, but it's not going anywhere. The evidence seems to suggest that these courses are becoming less and less effective. They're often over-engineered, overlong. And it's not actually how. And then we have all this body from the theory of learning, showing that's not actually how people learn. They forget most of this stuff. Most of it's irrelevant. It's not timely, and so on and so forth. So this change of direction is really, I think AI is putting a horse onto the cart, as it were, very quickly. And that horse is really pushing people towards performance. I think that's learning puts far too much focus on courses, and the word development is a bit vague. So what we're going to do here, I think it pushes us towards more measurable outcomes, proven performance. And I've just started. I've been commissioned to write a book on AI and productivity. Productivity emerges from performance, which is why performance is the key to productivity, really, and general progress in an organization. But that has to be in the flow of an organization. We know that we have to have this work environment where employees, if you want employees to feel really of high self-esteem, feel motivated, wanting to get on with things, give them the tools that make them feel good about doing the work, make them more productive. Yeah. And not giving them open your mouth, I'm going to shove a diet of courses into you. And this wider perspective is suddenly it's arrived on our laps. It links learning with performance. They go hand in glove, really. And if we just get on with it, and we don't just want faster horses. It's not just about making things the old Henry Ford line. It's also about higher quality, making people feel better about the job, increasing productivity. All those things are a big bundle of things that make things better for people, with a big caveat, of course, is that we don't start treating people inhumanely by sacking them and doing what we have in the past, and that's, we can see the political ramifications of that all over the world, here in Europe and in America. If you suddenly just say, well, I'm sorry, but the Chinese have got all your jobs all of a sudden, people are not going to react back well to that, and neither have they in Europe, when low paid people have remained low paid. And I think that's why upskilling is so terribly important here. But yeah, so then there's the video thing. Would you like me to sort of take out? It's an interesting area because it's just, yes, so it's one of many examples, guys. I'm glad you brought this one up because it's the most recent. So these AI models are released on the market, and they're all pretty good, to be honest. So much is getting, every time you go back to it, it gets better because they're doing lots of fine tuning. And so we do lots of projects with these tools, and often it's horses for courses, going back to that analogy again. Claude might be good for this, Gemini good for that, ChatGPT or GPT models good in another field. But this is a really interesting example because it's something close to my heart. I really like skills. I think we have drowned in a sea of text in learning, whether it's school, college, or the workplace. Almost e-learning is just text, graphic, multiple choice question. But that's not the real world. And college and school is almost all text-based. They've squeezed all vocation. You don't learn to do anything these days. All you do is go to school at age 5, pop out when you're 20, do a master's, and you're even older. And all you've done is read, write, and critique text. That's it. Every exam you ever sat was sitting there writing something. And then you come into the real world and find, oh my goodness, I've got to learn to drive a car. I'm not going to do that by reading. I'm going to get out in the car. And so we have to start acquiring skills. Now, Gemini, that's Google's large language model. They have released a thing called Gemini EXP. Nobody quite knows what EXP stands for. Is it experience or experimental? And it's got this rather odd name, Gemini EXP 1114. It's a bit cryptic, but it's getting some rave reviews because first of all, on benchmarking against OpenAI's GPT-4o model, it's beaten that hands down. That was a surprise because that's really that was top of the league table and has been for some time. But it has a feature that really intrigued me, and this big new feature is the analysis of video. So you can just upload a video. You have to put it in. Yep. You can't just click to a link from YouTube. You have to actually upload a downloaded video. And once you've uploaded it, you can use the large language model then to do an analysis on the video you've uploaded. Now that's interesting. This is something I waited on for many, many years. Now, so let's go through some of the things that you could possibly do for this. First of all, performance, the word we love. You can actually, let's say, analyze somebody's actual performance in a presentation. and learn how to present yourself. If you have to present, which many people have as they move into management in their organization or present at conferences or whatever, you can do that. You can, if you've got eye tracking data, and especially you can start teaching surgery, because where the eye is pointing is often a really good clue as to whether the skill has been really acquired. All sorts of details there. You can do coaching and sports performance. We know how big that is. Massive market in its own. You could give feedback on musical performance and playing a physical instrument. You can actually give feedback to teachers and lecturers on their teaching performance, because it will know what you've done, not only what you've done, what you've said, and perhaps using data from good pedagogy and good teaching practice, start to give you good advice there. You can compare your present with past performance. If you've videoed yourself previously and you've got some improvement in sports, teaching, whatever, it can do that. So there's that teaching, there's the performative side of it, but there's also the student learning side of it. So a learner can summarize a lecture, take the video of the lecture, and then start doing amazing things with it, because it will also, of course, start to interpret any images, graphs, or diagrams that appear, not just what the person said to you. Okay, and it can start to generate all sorts of stuff like practical tutorials as opposed to multiple choice questions. You can have vocational tutorials and picking out key clips from the video and performance support systems. How do I do this? It knows exactly where in the video how to tell you how to do that thing with that machine in that context. And then there's the branch scenario stuff. So there's all sorts of student learning stuff. So we've covered it's making judgments in your performance, student learning, and then one that I know you have particular expertise in, perhaps this is something we'll also discuss. There is the whole critical task analysis, behavioral analysis that goes into the creation of good performance support from real world actions and beliefs and knowledge you have about a task. And as we know, subject matter experts are notoriously difficult to extract knowledge from, because much of it's tacit. If you get three in a room, they often contradict each other and so on and so forth. But actually the video never lies. You can point it towards the process, and if it's a good process, you can capture it quite well and accurately. So there's all that workflow efficiency, all the redundant steps in a process, and we've used AI to do some amazing things in this area, where you get this massive shrinking or telescoping of what used to be a very long-winded process in consultancy and performance support, because it automates the process. And then a little thing like doing performance analysis of meetings. Did the meeting go well? Well, if you videoed it, it could probably spot where people were showboating, whether it should have stuck to the agenda, and so on and so forth, quite easily. And then there's all the real world stuff. This is where I really get excited, because you do all that health and safety stuff, spot where in this building site the mistakes, in this office where all the hazards are. And then lastly, there's a big opening here for assessments created from lectures or creating video-based assessments themselves, assessment of student presentations of their assignments and not the written stuff, which they may be sort of beefing up with ChatGPT. Identify specific errors you make when doing something. That's interesting, isn't it? You can actually spot mistakes in performance, and then as formative feedback, help people move on, turning feedback into a sort of feed forward. So I personally think this is a really interesting, one of many breakthroughs in AI that help us do what we've always wanted to do. I don't blame people for not having done this in the past, because it's been so very difficult. It's really easy lecturing or delivering an e-learning course or designing these courses. What's hard is real teaching, real support for people in the workplace, because it did historically need a ton of analysis, and that's shrinking, and it also needs the means of solving the problem. A lot of people talk about performance support but don't actually deliver it. So everybody says, we'll just create all these resources. Well, where are you going to put those resources? How do people access them? That sometimes annoys me, because it's all talk without practice. And so, the projects we've been working on really do deliver this stuff. Did that make sense? That opening up of opportunity there, Guy?
Yeah, no, I really like that. And the whole, we've been struggling with performance support because people can create a knowledge management system and pile a whole bunch of content in there. but it's not easy to use. It's not user friendly. It's not organized by the way I recognize my work. So I've always thought that,
Correct.
if we had most processes in enterprises are not named, they're not mapped, they're not measured, they're not managed, and so it's just this. We know it's a lot of processes, but we just don't have a good configuration, and we've not labeled them and organized them well so that we could orient performance support to those processes. And I think about the whole educational thing. This was a complaint in 1979 when I got into the business. We do too much education, not training. Now we've got
Correct.
the umbrella term of learning, but we're doing one size fits all. Everybody needs active listening, but your application for active listening, it might be different than mine. And if I learn some generic active listening, I may struggle with the transfer of that learning to the job and using it in my performance. And so what I'm excited about is you talked about the AI being able to give me feedback, corrective feedback, reinforcing feedback. If I'm practicing active listening in my own context, my performance context, it should be able, so this is something that's always been missing from most L&D training and development instruction going way, way back, is authentic practice with feedback. And so if I can do that, and because that's so time consuming, so we always, truncate that, and it's always, one and done at best, if we do one at all. And so I think
you've hit the nail on the head there with that observation as always, Guy, because what people don't fully understand if they've never been involved with it before, it's time consuming, expensive, because the people doing that are experts and expensive, and their time is short. And so if there are any ways we can automate that, we'll see its resurgence in many ways. And I think there's nothing wrong with automating things, because very often in my experience over decades now, subject matter experts don't actually write, when you go to them and say, can you write me a definitive document on this, blah, blah, they don't really like going away for 2 weeks and writing those documents.
No.
It's a chore. And actually, I'd much rather use those people to validate content than write it. Because all they're doing is trying to get out of their own minds what they think they know, but they've forgotten a lot of it. There are gaps. It's a bit messy. It's tacit knowledge, all those things we know well. I think the interesting thing, going back to the AI for a moment, is one of the things I like about personal agency is the way they've solved, the way in which the interface helps. Why are so many people using this all day, every day? And I think it comes down to, I often say there's the Seymour Papert thing with, it's got low ceiling, a low floor, high ceiling, wide walls. Unlike any other interface or bit of technology we've ever seen before. And by low floor, I mean, it's really easy to use. You just type something in or upload an image or upload a video or whatever, it's super easy. That's low floor. High ceiling is the really interesting one because it gives you that wow. What you get back is astounding. In like 8 seconds, you get a fulsome reply with a rationale. And I don't know if you've used ChatGPT 4.0 which has reasoning in it. You can give it a really tricky logical problem or process problem. And not only does it give you the answer, it gives you the rationale. It's mind-blowingly good. Mind-blowingly good. And I've written a lot about that particular aspect and how it helps with performance support. Because it not only gives you the answer on how to do something, but why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. The wide walls is it knows everything. Now, this is getting really interesting in performance support because performance support, these models already have transcended the knowledge of many subject matter experts. And actually what they tend to do is be really good at getting all the sort of the bottom half of the pyramid in a subject matter expert's mind. It'll just splurge it out straight off. No problem at all. To very high quality. But there's probably a little bit at the top that it misses, which is usually contextual. But even there, going back to the interface thing, you give agency back to the learner, the employee, doesn't matter, don't call them what you will, then they provide the context themselves. Give them agency, because they bring that to the party. An interesting thing that's happening in AI, which is people have forgotten, is it's got a memory now. It knows who you are. It knows what you've asked before. It will increasingly be aware of your context and who you are and what you want from a query, which is why all those prompting courses have died a death. It's getting quite good at this. So in performance support, prior knowledge is really important in terms of what you tell them. You don't want to go into detail on the detailed definition of a word they've used for the last 20 years in the workplace and they know it inside out. So I think even in context, the fact that AI has, and people are looking at this very interesting thing by one of the founders of DeepMind. He is a really amazing guy, really. He says, what we're heading towards is infinite memory. There's a really interesting phrase here. In other words, it knows not only a lot about you, but your context and your organization and where it's heading. It knows all the things that you probably don't. It knows more about your organization than you, not necessarily more about you than you. Although that's an interesting point because we're very limited. On that note, I created a chat GPT with all my books in it and all, like masses of text. And I quite often go on it and ask myself questions because I've forgotten most of what I had read in life or written.
Exactly.
So it's not as if human beings are terribly, this is why performance support works. Humans are frail. They're fragile and they forget stuff. They forget almost everything. And they need help all the time to move forward. And suddenly this tool, these performance tools have been given to them, often for free, because the free ones are pretty good. You don't have to pay your $20 a month. That's a sort of cherry on the cake type service. By and large, you can get on and use this stuff for free. And if you've got a smartphone, internet connection, that's pretty much everybody on the planet. I don't really know what the digital divide is here. I was in Africa many times over the last couple of years. I mean, almost everybody there has a smartphone. And so I think we've got a lot of white savior type projection onto other economies and parts of the world, imagining that they don't have this technology when they do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the exciting things is that this expands the accessibility to the world of content, the world of knowledge, the world of skills building capabilities, and hopefully it brings people who are at the bottom half, so to speak, brings them up. It helps us diminish the have-nots from the haves, and in terms of education, gives everybody more of an equal playing field in life.
You mentioned once again, I know that you know this world inside out, so you're coming up with the right keywords. Access and accessibility, slightly different things, but this is a really big deal in AI. So when I've given all these talks at conferences all over the world for the last couple of years, and invariably I tell people this: you get a little queue of people coming up, and they either they don't like AI much and want to have a go at you. That is fine, it's no problem on the ethical front. But there's always one. Sometimes the first person up who was dyslexic. It's amazing how often this has happened to me, and they're really thankful for this tech because they failed their exams at school and college because they don't read and write well. Mm-hmm. And yet they're super smart. They just have this deficit and we punish them for it. It's amazing. Along comes AI. And actually, since the 90s, text to speech, speech to text, which are pure AI functions now, have absolutely revolutionized the lives of those with hearing or visual impairment. Absolutely revolutionized their lives. Their smartphones are like the remote controls in their lives. And if you've ever spoken to somebody who really is blind or has a deaf, and get into dialogue about what technology they use, you'll be there for hours. And they know, and the smartphone has become such a great thing from them. AI has given us it's taken this to another level now, because you can do things like, it's gone into the areas like autism, ADHD, but also things like dyslexia, where you can actually take any output in performance support or courses or learning in any context and have it retranslated into more vocational language, for example, because actually what people need in the workplace is like layman's speak. They don't, and so in medical stuff, you find it's all academic speak. And of course, nurses struggle with this because they didn't have the luxury of the 6-year medical degree to get to grips with all that vocabulary. So it often mishits. And I think now we've been involved in projects where we take whatever output is and get AI to automatically tailor it to the audience, in terms of level, much more vocational, action-orientated, transfer of learning type language. And that helps with performance enormously, of course. And then just making it shorter and concise, the summarization capability is amazing. We all know that, I often used to say this, I used to teach this stuff, in learning theory. There's a really good rule of thumb from the psychology of learning. which is less is more.
Exactly.
I mean, that's really those three words should be on every learning designer's wall, Less is always more. and yet courses tend to follow the very opposite precept that more is more. We need the history of this topic.
Yeah.
We need more detail. No, you don't. They're not going to remember it. It doesn't matter when it comes to performance and action. Mm-hmm. Which is why performance support people are really cute when it comes to checklists, job aids, the really smart ways of doing this. It's all about making it concise. And hey, presto, AI does this wonderfully well. In seconds, it can do it in real time. So, and then of course we've got the translation stuff. So most courses, most teaching is in one language in an institution. But here we have very large immigrant populations in many countries in the world now. You can actually have stuff, if you want, delivered in their language, or even if, let's say, English is their second language, or German is their second language, whatever, Dutch. You can actually make sure that language is to the prescribed level. So in Europe, we have a thing called B1 English, which is a level in English which you have to reach if you want to be a nurse in the Netherlands or England. But we can make sure that any performance support or course stuff you give is not exceeding the B1 level, translating it in that constraint. These are all wonderful things. This is what we wanted, rather than that hokey old, here's an e-learning course. Oh, by the way, if you want the audio, click on this button. We can actually build it in so that it's accessible for everybody without it being an add-on.
I think that's one of the great things is the language translations and dealing with people and their physical disabilities, their learning disabilities, and helping to overcome that and again leveling the playing field for the world at large. And we've got so much knowledge and skills that are needed across the globe, and now this just makes it easier.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you've been working on.
Okay, so let me think. Well, all different contexts. Let me give you one from a non-workplace. We'll give you one from education and maybe one from the workplace, and a nice balance there. I mean, we worked with a company here in England who have been doing a lot of note-taking for many years. It's quite a big, successful company globally, and they're in many colleges in the US and so on. Now, note-taking isn't college interesting? About 40% of students that pay very large sums of money these days go into college, and about 40% of them don't turn up for lectures or many lectures after the first 6 months. And you may think that's puzzling. I don't, because I spent a lot of, I went to Ivy League and went to a big European university. The quality of teaching is often quite, it's okay, but it's not great. And kids now especially know that if they have a recording of the lecture and all these tools, they can learn much faster. Now, this note-taking is really interesting. Note-taking is the bridge between the content that you want the student to know and their performance going forward, or to put it more crudely, the passing of the exam or test or the degree. Now, what we did there was, note-taking is funny because as you're taking notes, you can't multitask. We know that's impossible. So you're actually looking down, writing the sentence, and you're not listening to what the lecturer is saying. So it's hopeless, really, isn't it, as a method? So they're missing half of it. Nevertheless, it's valuable, but the notes is the only thing you walk out the lecture theatre with and remember, because working memory just discards everything, apart from the few things you remember, and most of that's going to be captured in your notes. You go into the quiet of your own room in the library and you distill your notes, and of course you get all the wrong advice. Universities just say, well, buy a felt tip pen and underline it and reread and underline and reword. No, that's far too slow. You should be looking away from your notes and trying to recall it back into your mind, because retrieval practice really makes you learn that much faster. But nobody ever told kids that. Now they do, because I know loads of kids now, my kids were the same, they use flashcards. Despite the fact that the university never provides anything like this for them, they're smart enough to know better pedagogy than the people who teach. Now, on this application, it was note-taking, especially for students who struggled with accessibility, but normal students as well. And what it does is it takes your notes, compares it to the original lecture, and you can see whether you missed anything. Now, it doesn't write your notes for you, it just puts headings in there so you can go and fill it out so it's more fulsome. Not only that, it adds things like quizzing for retrieval practice. It will automatically turn your notes into powerful learning experience for you going forward, give you links out to other useful content. all those, there's a whole rack of things we did there. And real product, not just prototyping type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the way all this is going. We're giving agency back to the note taker. And so that's a good example from education where, well, why wouldn't you want that stuff? Because students certainly do. And because they're using it already. There was an amazing little TikTok video I saw just 2 days ago of a lecturer in a big US university where the lecturer had installed a camera at the back of the lecture hall. And it was supposed to catch students cheating. This is a big mistake, by the way. If you're going to turn it into a cat and mouse game, there are too many mice, and the mice are winning. So don't do this. And he showed the student up on the projector and shamed them in front of the class. And of course, he wasn't cheating. He was actually using a very good tool, like the one, I don't think it was the one that we had built, but one to create flashcards, do summarization, get a transcript. And all that stuff, and the kid was going, oh, no, hold on, no, I love your lecture. I'm just I want to learn more from it. And the lecturer did not get it and accused him publicly and shamed him for cheating. So we're getting this clash between the old world and the new. I think this is normal whenever any new technology comes in, Guy, but it was an interesting project to work on because you get a lot of blowback from universities who just don't want AI, those two letters, near anything. And in the mistaken view that there are moral imperatives that mean you cannot use it at all. Whereas the exact opposite is true. This is helping students who are likely to drop out of courses. There's 40 million people in the US who have student debts and no degrees.
Yeah.
And so I think if we're going to start solving this problem, technology is the only way forward, because we know that the existing model has that failure rate, which is massive. People are taking 6, 7, 8 years to do a bachelor's degree. And so if we can accelerate their learning and help them more, perhaps we'll solve that problem. So if we think for a moment about workplace learning, which is a very different context, and you said earlier in this podcast, let's not confuse education with workplace learning, the training and so on. They're very, very different things. And so this is a project in a performance support company. So this is a company in the Netherlands run by someone I think Alfred Remet's expertise, and I know Alfred really well. And I've always been interested in performance support, got to know Alfred well and worked with him in the past. And he's doing quite a lot on using AI. We've been helping him with that and building tools that really accelerate what he's been doing very well. So he has a system called Ask Delphi, which is a performance support system. There are other companies that do this. They are quite dominant. In fact, he's so dominant in Europe that they call it the Remitz effect on performance support at conferences. He's sort of convinced people this is right, and he's doing work in, in the military and tax and the police and all sorts of really interesting, hardcore practical places, and especially in healthcare. So we did this really interesting project with a large teaching hospital in the Netherlands where they had already been working. And they've been using performance support and absolutely love it, because medicine's a much more dynamic and hardcore field where you need it, where there's very many people working at this coal face that need advice and workplace advice all of the time. This was on surgical support. Now, that's a really tough subject because it's high risk, people die. And it was for all the nurses. There are many more nurses that work in surgery than surgeons, of course. Mm-hmm. It's the big support role. And these nurses are really skilled people. They know their stuff. But things change, and it's almost like the airline industry, surgery. There's that famous book, Checklist, which showed that actually even when an airplane's falling out the sky, a pilot will go to the checklist. Yeah. Because that's more likely to save them than his long-term memory, him or her. So on this project, we took something we know well, which is that, and you know better than me, Guy, which is the analysis process that leads up to performance support is difficult, complex, takes time, takes people, effort, money. So we looked at the sweet spots there. Is there anything in this process we can just use AI to automate and short circuit? Turns out quite a lot of it could. So I won't go into a huge amount of detail on this, but they got these massive savings in time, basically. And it was quite well measured. We had a really great team here, 3 very young people. Sania, Saskia. There were two people of expertise with some really good subject matter experts in the teaching hospital, and then Callum, who was the AI guy in the mix. And they just got together and they were doing things on the fly. You know, Callum was in the Netherlands sitting with two very experienced performance support consultants, and they kept going, my God, it can do this as well. And we've got Sani, who's new to AI, although very, very smart girl. She took a deep dive and as did Saskia, they both got up to speed on AI very, very quickly by doing their homework, and that helped enormously. So we managed to telescope that right down with these massive increases, not only in speed. The interesting thing about telescoping that process is you also get significant increases in quality. Now, why is that so? Well, first of all, there's a quality thing associated with the AI not making the same mistakes as subject matter experts. But let's put that to one side. What was really interesting was that Saskia and Sani could concentrate on the quality of the performance support and not the spade work of analysis. And that was it surprised them because they could do a much better job because a lot of it was fine-tuning towards the end. Now, when they went to the actual nurses in the actual teaching hospital, the feedback was truly unbelievable. They were so taken aback at how good this was that they were saying things like, my God, this is just like something out of the movies or something. It was so surreally interesting and advanced. And that's what people are missing here. You know, if you use these tools well in a very focused fashion in a domain like performance support, where there are many experts like yourself, Alfred, in this case, Sani and Saskia, team them up with somebody who really knows their AI well, is right on the leading edge of these models and has actually built stuff, a real practitioner rather than just faffing around and pushing. What we managed to do here is push it through the prototype into product. So there are several things you can learn from these AI projects and performance support. One is that ideas are really easy. Lots of people talking about it. Implementation is really hard. So you've got to have really good people in the right team mixture who, I think a really important thing here is that the team was very young and didn't have that old, what you might call the weary pessimism and moralizing of older people towards AI. You know, that one of the things that can destroy these projects is somebody who just goes on and on about ethics all the time. And you go, well, yeah, that's fine, but like, what do you want me to do here? You know, it's all very well talking about data ethics, but listen, we have to solve this problem by storing the data in the right way, in the right place, and alleviating people's fears. And that's a practical design and engineering and software problem. So that was the first thing. Second really interesting thing about these projects is top-down support. So we had the head of the hospital who's really behind this. And I actually know him personally as well. And I think that really helps. And there's another project I've been involved in, which is a large global company, 1.5 billion turnover. And again, it was the chief exec who drove it. It was a German company, and he found that he was using this stuff for strategic work. He was going, my God, this is amazing. You know how good this is in helping me run this massive company. Why aren't all of my senior team using it? So we went into the senior team. Sorry, it's a tangent. We got them all to submit ideas. We actually used the AI to do a bit of cluster analysis on the many, many ideas we had to sort of filter them. And then he put some budgets towards key productivity increasing projects that he pushed through. So sometimes the top-down thing helps. But of course, that's never quite enough because in the team, you need all that bottom-up understanding, because, a lot of AI projects really do flounder when the team has non-technical members who don't quite understand what AI is, and you spend all your time explaining how it works and why it's not like traditional software because it's probabilistic, which is why you have to test a lot and benchmark it a lot to measure performance. And it might change tomorrow because it's going to get a lot better. So let's swap out the model. That's a world people are unfamiliar with. They're usually, let's spec it, build it, launch it.
Yeah.
This is like super agile stuff. And you have to live with a bit of uncertainty here. So there's optimization of the team. I'm a big believer in Occam's razor and teams. Traditionally L&D go for these big stakeholder teams, and it just takes months and months. In truth, I'm not too sure about the wisdom. I've never understood the wisdom of that, unless you're confusing a build project with a change management project when you do that. Builders are, by and large, a lot of them are about getting it done and getting the change made in the organization, not about building the thing. And let's not confuse the two. But another thing that's come to the fore for me, the more project, I know, that's 10 years, 2014 started really doing this AI type stuff full time. I think mindset, that's a big one for me, Guy. AI is this strange, mercurial, fast moving technology, and you really have to dispel a lot of the myths about how it works, the data issues, its capabilities. And then you've got to communicate this to people and explain it in a way that they understand. And you have to understand it. Sometimes what's hard is easy and what's easy is hard and all that sort of stuff. And the fact that things change quickly. So managing expectations takes a certain mindset. Now, and you also have to, I think the client or the people working in the team really have to make the effort to understand what this AI stuff is, or you'll just flounder and you'll be asking the wrong questions and just holding the rest back. So I think that mindset shift, getting a good team in place. And then another one I've noticed in this area is pushing things beyond the prototype into product.
Mm-hmm.
So, that it's very often I see a lot of sort of vanity projects or, I've got a grant to do an AI project in a university or whatever. And they're all mosquito projects. They all last, until the end of the grant and completely die a death. I don't really enjoy working on that stuff, unless it's pure research. I have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. But if you're pretending you're building a product, you're not really, you're building a prototype that's going to die, that's a mistake. Now, in this case, going back to the surgical support project, the great thing about this company is they do performance support. They understand that you have to, it's that thing that we asked at the beginning of this podcast. Performance support is one thing. How do you deliver it is another. It's quite hard delivering. You need technology to do it, really.
Yeah.
They had the technology that does it already, and we want to make that a lot better. So we're now pushing it through into a far more sophisticated product. We've got all the process side done. We'll now be turning it into something, you can see where this is going, where with a select number of people who really know what performance support is, you can put it in the hands of a really good group of subject matter experts, give them support, but they can start using these tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, that's always been the nirvana. That was always the dream in the e-learning world. We'll just build some tools and we'll give it to trainers or subject matter experts and leave them to it. It was a disaster. That never happened. It never happened because actually you need a lot more than just the tool. Giving somebody a copy of Microsoft Word doesn't make them a novelist. It's the craziness of that idea. It was sort of maddening to me. Oh, we've got a rapid development tool. Big deal. I don't care.
That's hurt, I think, L&D, the 90s when that came about, and anybody and everybody could become a developer of content, and they were a developer of content. It just wasn't instructional. It didn't help people perform. It didn't give them the foundational stuff or the, here's how to apply it. But we're learning. We're
yeah, that's right. I often say that the L&D in education is a slow learner. But I think we're getting to, I wrote a book called Learning Experience Design where, as you know, in the final chapters, I pushed towards performance support because a learning experience designer now has to know about performance support. It would be ridiculous. Otherwise, you're just building courses in the fashion we've just described. You're missing out 80% of delivery if you're not aware of this stuff and know that AI can help you and so on. So I think this is starting to happen now. It's coming to pass. And to be fair, again, I go back to this point. I don't want to blame people for historically having gone through this. We just didn't have the technology that could deliver this stuff in the past, I feel, or it delivered at great cost. And now I think it's getting easier. We'll default in more towards performance support than perhaps course delivery. And what's interesting is, Guy, when you do a really strong critical behavioral analysis and all that stuff on what the people need to know, actually a lot of it doesn't have to be remembered. Right. The critical stuff does. You really, you don't want somebody doing surgery on you without having gone through some pretty solid direct instruction and so on. Same with pilots and airplanes and so on. But actually, there's a pile of stuff that actually is best delivered through performance support. We tend to shovel that into courses, which is because we never had any way of getting it to people.
Yeah, exactly. That was our only means to deploy it or make it accessible is to put it in a course. But I've said this before, written this before, that I think probably of all the analyses I've done, and I've done hundreds of them, performance analysis, and then what's the knowledge and skills that you need to be able to perform. the performance context does not demand a memorized performance response. Now, sometimes it does,
Right.
but the vast majority, and I would take a wild guess and say 75 to 80% of the time,
Yeah.
the performance context allows for a referenced performance response. You do have time to look it up and get it right, rather than off the top of your head and hope that you get it right. And if you use performance support often enough, every day, all day long, you soon won't need it. You'll have it memorized because that's what's needed in the performance context. So this is so exciting because I think the promise, we now have the technology in place to create it, to administrate it, maintain it, continuously improve it, and to deploy it and make it accessible to the people who need it. And we will hopefully, I remember the gurus, the thought leaders back in the early 80s complaining about we're forcing people to memorize too many things and they can't. Yet we pretend that they do, and we use, recognition versus recall. And we're defaulting to recognition, and nowhere in the world, with a few exceptions, where you're recognizing the right answer versus recalling the right answer. And if you can look it up and reference it, we'll just get better, faster, and cheaper performance, which is really what it's all about. In an enterprise learning context, it's about performance. It's not about learning. That's a means to the ends of performance. So how do we provide people what they need so that they can be successful out there on the job?
It's very interesting speaking to you, Guy, because you've been a practitioner in performance support more than almost anybody. And you said something really interesting there, which is true. When you actually do this stuff for real, it turns out, so a lot of these critical, let's take the critical task analysis, take that one little bit.
Mm-hmm.
People put it into two boxes, or they have a scale of 1 to 5, and therefore half of it goes in there and half of it goes in there, just because the scale they're using, with some in the middle. Actually, it turns out to be more Pareto analysis. It turns out to be more, as you rightly said, 80-20. And so I think when you actually apply AI, the cold, that cold analytic reasoned eye of AI, it does precisely what you've just said. It actually comes out more like 80-20 as opposed to 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
You have, in fact, you end up putting less in courses and more into performance support on the premise of good pedagogy and how people learn and so on. So I think that's what we've found as well. It changes your view of some of the things we've taken as sort of dogma. Well, not dogma, it's taken as good practice in the past. We can start to fine tune our performance support analysis based on the empirical experience in using AI to do this stuff. Because it strips some of the human bias out of it a little bit. There's a tendency for us to think things are critical when they're not. That sort of thing. And also in behavioral analysis, we quite often, our eyes are drawn to things that are not the right things. There's some other things that are important. So humans tend to introduce a lot of bias into the analysis phase, I think, which we collectively in the past have always had to do through very detailed documentation and checks and balances and validation. But I think we can start speeding things up enormously now, which is what we found in expertise. And if you're interested, I don't know if you got an opportunity to put a link. This young team, Saskia, Callum, and Sani, John Helmer did a really good podcast, so very different from this podcast, about the nuts and bolts of them doing the project. I'd really recommend that people listen to it. First of all, the content's good, but listen to the enthusiasm of those young people. Yeah. To see how energized they were by this.
I will put a link to that John Helmer podcast in the show notes here on this, so that people can go look at that. But one of the things that I'm very interested in coming, and I don't know if it's really here or not, is that I'm a fan and a follower of Richard E. Clarke. And he spent 25 years working on cognitive task analysis, which, going beyond what you can observe, the overt behaviors that we can see people do. We can count them, we can measure them, we can define all that. What are people actually doing? It's the cognitive task analysis that goes before, during, and after the behavioral tasks, and extracting that. So his method for CTA, cognitive task analysis, is to interview 5 to 6 experts, and then you interview one at a time, and then you have to reconcile all the differences that you've collected to see if it, is it semantics or what is it, or is it really simply another way to do something, and they're both valid, and so you can iron all that out to figure out, well, how do we instruct people, either teach them or provide them with performance support about how to think about what they're doing while they're doing it, and extracting that. And so he worked on a project with the University of Southern California that ultimately failed because turnover in the group of AI experts that were putting this together, because they're so valuable. And so I think he was very frustrated in that. But I'm hoping that at some point we can do the performance analysis and figure out, here's the behavioral tasks, here's the cognitive tasks, here's how we package that into performance support. Guy, when you're doing this, look out for this situation and be situationally aware. And if these are the variables that are stable, and if they're changed, you got to respond differently. And I think rather than me looking at a screen that gives me everything, it can give me, if this is the condition you're operating in, do it this way instead, because that's best. And so I think the power of all that coming is just enormous. And I wish that the thought leaders of my youth would be around today to see this, because they talked about this forever, and now we're finally getting it.
Yeah, well, I'm a fan of Rich Clark as well, but I think that things have changed. Things always do change, and I don't think the focus of activity here is now in the universities, because I think Rick Clark was saying, it's going to take 8 million and it's going to take 12 years or whatever, 8 years or whatever. I said, well, and then along comes generative AI and blows everybody's socks off.
Yeah, exactly.
And remember, that came not from the university system; it came from OpenAI, Google, Anthropic. It was all outside of the university system, because they're focused on research, not actual product and getting things done in the real world. I also think there is a big distortion in the research field in this. I think we could have a whole podcast in this one alone. It would get quite esoteric. I think the distortion in academia is in imagining that everything is too cognitive in a way. So they start with almost the Bloom's pyramid type view of the world, forgetting that there were two other, you actually had a tripartite distinction with the affective and psychomotor side, which everybody ignores. So every academic in the world knows Bloom's pyramid, but nobody's ever looked at anything else that was done by Krathwohl and others. And now, of course, Bloom's pyramid turns out to be completely wrong, because actually knowledge is sort of marbled like fat into the meat. There is no pyramid. Learning is a much more fluid and complex cognitive process than people imagine. Now, Dick's well aware of this, but I think they get bogged down with that word cognitive, in imagining that the real world is like the academic world, and that training is a bit like education. Now, Dick knows that's not true, but he over-egged the task, because I think we've done this year what he said would take 8 years to do.
Yeah. I mean, the power of AI has just changed everything. It changes everybody's estimates of what it's going to take to get something done, because now you have all these fantastic tools that are just better, faster, and cheaper. It's more than a step increase. It's several steps.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, for our audience here. So besides following you on AI and all that, who else would you recommend? You've mentioned your son Callum, so I can put in a LinkedIn link to his and yours pages on LinkedIn. But who else should people be following to stay abreast of this fast-moving arena?
Yeah, there's on the performance support thing, Alfred Remitz is a good example. Yourself, of course. There are people who've been around for a while and know what this is, and we can learn from them. Now, on the AI front, that's interesting, because I just have a natural bent towards following practitioners as opposed to just talk about it. So there's like lots of people have popped up in L&D and give talks at conferences, and you go, I give a sort of widening of my eyebrows to some of that stuff, because I know some of them personally, and they go, hold on a minute, you were criticizing AI just a few years ago, and now you're billing yourself as the AI expert. So I think I would look for people who were talking about this before generative AI sprung on us in
Mhm.
2022. Look for clues there, and then ask a big question: have you actually delivered or built anything and done anything
Yeah.
with real learners in real organizations and real projects? And there's one exception to this but to be fair, this guy's done a lot of practical research as well at Stanford, and that's Ethan Mollick. So Ethan Mollick on Twitter X is absolutely superb. And I think if you're in the learning field in AI, he's pretty much, there are a whole rack of people like that who I follow religiously on Twitter and also on LinkedIn. I think that, but always ask that question: who's actually doing the stuff here? And then it comes down to individuals who are working in particular sectors, whether it be on AI coaches and mentoring or whatever. And there's a whole rack of people there. David James I like because I think he has always been open to the performance, going, what are we doing? We're spending, 300 billion on LMSs and libraries of content that nobody likes and nobody is using. What's gone badly wrong here? I think he's particularly interesting on that stuff. I've learned a lot from David but that's more general L&D thing about repositioning L&D as being a wee bit more open to AI and performance support. But to be honest, I think there's a lot of of traditional L&D people jumping on the AI bandwagon and going, oh look, it's just. I get really annoyed by the people saying, oh, people are just using it for content creation. Actually, they're not. You're just looking at the wrong people. Nobody ever goes on to ChatGPT and says, could you give me a little e-learning course on this?
Yeah.
Nobody does that. What they're talking about, because they're in a little bubble, they think that everybody's doing that, but of course they're not. They're using it for performance support, going back to what we said at the beginning. 999 out of 1,000 are using it in the way we would recommend they do use it, to help them overcome a problem at that moment in the workflow of life, in the workflow of the workplace, in the workflow of school, in the workflow of college. They're using it in the moment to solve a problem, because that's how the brain actually thinks and learns and operates in the real world. And so I think a lot of that really weird survey stuff is pointing to the wrong people and coming up with pretty strange conclusions when they should be discussing the sort of things we're discussing now, I suspect. I think there's a lot of an interesting little evidence of that is a whole number of companies in UK and Europe have been laying off staff on that content LMS side. Some of those companies are going into very flat, plateaued growth. It's getting massively price sensitive and competitive. That's a sign that model is starting to freeze up a little bit, and look like old world.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic to get into. Let me shift here before we wrap up here. Okay. So my final question was, there's problems, there's challenges, there's opportunities in corporate L&D, enterprise L&D, whatever label you give to that, different than the educational system. So what do you see are their major issues, the problem or opportunity, and how should they go about addressing that? I know that AI is probably a part of that, but there's a whole mindset, I think, of L&D leadership that's at the root of these challenges, these issues.
Well, a number of things. I mean, first of all, I don't want to be too critical of any individuals or things, because this happens. I'm old enough I've been in technology for 40 years. It happened, and every time there was I remember the shift to CDs, the shift to the internet, smartphones, Wikipedia, social media, everything, there's always this massive naysaying in L&D because they're people, and a lot of them are performative. They loved standing in front of flip charts. That was, it's like amateur dramatics world at one time, when I first came into this industry. And it was those sort of people, and they're really lovely, nice people, but that was never the solution to the problem. It was just non-scalable, and the world moved on. So we get this noise and heat every time the two tectonic plates rub together. But some things I think we should be doing, and that's at least learning from this mistakes before and stop falling into the confirmation and negativity bias around every new piece of technology that comes along, trying to ban it, and the crazy moralizing around ethics, the sort of sci-fi level of speculation. 1 minute, you see the same people, I see it all the time, they say, oh, this AI stuff's really crap, isn't it? It hallucinates everywhere. But let's ban it because it's going to kill us in our beds. Well, it can't be both. It can't be both of those things. I've seen the same people say the same thing. Oh, look, isn't it terrible? Oh, look, we should be really fearful because it's really good.
Yeah.
There's a contradiction. But I think being practical for a moment, I think we're duty bound if we're in the learning technology area to do our homework. And it's easy because everything's online. You don't have to go on a prompting course or take some daft sort of, these courses, many of them are, by the time you've designed the course and delivered it, you're miles out of date because new models, new functionality has been released. It's not difficult to keep up with this stuff, but if you follow the right people like Ethan Mullick and so on, as you know me, I post regularly on LinkedIn with anything that's released on research, new models, new functionality with a learning twist. And I think there are plenty of people out there doing this stuff and trying to help, inform people about what's happening. But it sort of saddened me a little bit, the reaction in the L&D, suddenly, I saw it just after your US election, everybody flouncing off to Blue Sky. And I find that a lack of realism there. I posted something on LinkedIn and go, I'm not too sure that people realize that Blue Sky is actually funded by some crypto guys who are pretty evil. This is not Mastodon. This is not a free, open, unfunded thing. This is funded by the people who actually funded Twitter, curiously, blockchain and so on. And I find that you get this knee-jerk reaction stuff all the time, that saddens me a little because there's some robust debates to be had around AI, and they're interesting debates, but we have to have them. We don't flounce off in the huff just because we don't like it, And I think more openness around AI and more discussion and more exposure of real projects, I would like to see. I think you go to a lot of conferences and you see a lot of the sessions are just massively theoretical about AI and ethics and responsible AI and how to make explainable and transparent AI by people who have not actually used AI but really don't know much about the real nuts and bolts of the game.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to stop all of that, or the endless debates about the future of L&D, and we just say the same things over and over and again like Groundhog Day, but we don't address the big challenges and have really robust debates about this. Maybe all that DEI stuff that we love, isn't that great for people? Maybe people got a bit pissed off with all that and suddenly didn't like it very much. Do we have that debate? No, we don't, because you can't talk about those things. Mm-hmm. And I think we're in an era here where we've got to talk more and suppress less. And the way to do that is to do what you do very, very well, Guy. You have a lot of knowledge, but you're passing it on to the next generation quite effectively, I think. And I think more people should be doing that. So, but I think just, let's get real. Let's understand that this technology is not going away, that it will be the foundational technology for the next 50 years, if not a century or forever. It's given us what we've always wanted, smart technology, doing smart things to make people smarter. That's our game. Wasn't that meant to be our game? Our game wasn't to slab out endless courses on compliance, DEI and resilience, and accuse people of having deficits all the time. Our aim was to develop people and let them work better, to higher quality, to progress in their lives and in the workplace. But we're not. We're suddenly found ourselves defending the organizations against our own employees half of the time. That's what underlies a lot of these courses on compliance, accusing people of something, and then we've accused them so much we have to deliver a course on resilience to make them robust after having just knocked them down. We have to build them all up again, and people go, "Oh, I don't know where I stand here." And all I want to do is actually do well in my job and get things done. So, and it's interesting. I'm just reflecting on what we just talked about here, Guy. I think we're seeing a swing back to good old-fashioned competencies in people. People gaining skills to do stuff, as opposed to us constantly being some sort of therapist around their feelings and so on. There's room and space for that,
Yeah.
It's become so dominant, nobody's actually learning stuff that's useful. And I think we're living in an era where we have massive skill shortages in all our countries, nursing area, in every area of endeavour, and plenty of people, as I say, who can debate but can't do, and who can talk but can't walk the walk. And I think that's saddened me a little bit, because I think we need more of that. Well, and I think just one thing. I think the organisations that sit above it, all the trade associations, they've got a bit talky and negative and moral about everything, you know. I had I had an email this morning from somebody who I know really well and really like, urging me to move to Blue Sky. I'm saying, well, what's it got to do with you? What platform I use? You're an L&D guy. Why did you send me this email? I'll choose what platforms I want. You're infringing on my sense of my own agency here. I think if we start doing that, we'll really lose the plot and become sidelined. And to be honest, L&D is already in a bit of a corner. Let's not corner ourselves even further.
It reminds me of the joke I heard from the TQM folks back in the late 70s, and that is, we are opportunity rich. We've got so many issues, opportunities, and problems that we can't. We got more of those than we can shake a stick at, as the saying goes over here. Anyway, Donald, thank you I want to thank you so much for agreeing to be my first guest on this podcast, and I hope to have you back again to talk about where did we get to next, because obviously this is we're not at any end point. We're just on this trajectory, and we'll see where it takes us. But I think the power of these tools, that infinite memory that you mentioned, I think that is just going to change so much. And of course, that's probably why there's so much fear, is because we don't see exactly what this is going to mean to us and to our organizations and such. But I think that we have to be ever vigilant on what the opportunities are, and learn about these things, and keep experimenting, and then keep applying them, and not just talking about them, but putting them to use to see where they'll take us. And there will be false starts, and that's just the way things are, and so there'll be dead ends. But we should just, nonetheless, we need to keep on pushing to help our people improve their performance, our processes, our enterprises, our value chains, the world at large. I mean, I think this can be good for everybody. But I guess it's the fear of the unknown that might hurt us. But so I'm going to send you the list of names here, and then put those in the show notes. We're going to be posting this in another month or so.
Sure.
And again, thank you so much for being my guest on this podcast.
Yeah, no problem, Guy. It's always a pleasure to speak to somebody who's open and is generous with their time and resources, and passing what they know on to other people. So more power to your elbow.
Thank you, Donald. Have a good day.
Okay, take care.
All right, bye-bye.